Hey everyone, welcome to the video. This one we're going over tonight's 7-game NBA slate for tonight on Draftkings. Before we continue though, if you guys could leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out, really appreciate it. You can also follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16. And if you're interested in this spreadsheet, I build every single night for the NBA season. Links in the description below for my Patreon. I update this all the way up until lock, so you'll get the most up-to-date info. Because again, a lot of things change throughout the day. I come on here around like 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. making my video. A lot of things can change heading into 7 p.m. when lock happens. With injury news, and then rotations can change. So if you want all my up-to-date info, this is where it's at. It's what I use to help make my videos every single day. It's got the player info, the matchups, the Vegas totals, the pace of play, the advanced statistics like average minutes per game, points per minute, usage rate, all the things I like to talk about on my videos, the DraftKings stats per game, and then I build my projections at the very end. You can sort it by value or just highest projected guys. Also, my defense versus position chart. If you are interested in DVP, you can tell that Washington is one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA. Atlanta, Cleveland. You can help identify good matchups. You can help identify bad matchups, and I also do my cheat sheet, which I update all the way up until lock, with three favorite at each position, spend ups, mid range values, and then my core plays are like right there. And then I have my notes at the end that I update going up until lock. So again, if you're interested, links in the description below for my Patreon if you want all my up-to-date info. And without further ado, I say we get into today's slate. And let me just make sure you guys can see the players' names when we pop them up. And you can. Okay, so let's just talk about today's slate. So I really don't feel the need to spend all the way up for anybody. There's some 9K guys that I like a lot. But if you want to play James Harden, you can. He's just 13K with Russell Westbrook being back. It's a good matchup versus San Antonio. They struggle versus guards this season, but I just don't see myself paying 13K for Harden. Doncic, fortunately, he has a sprained ankle. He's going to be out for a while. Giannis, if you always want to play Giannis, you definitely can. Dallas is not the worst defensive team, but I don't really care about matchups when it comes to the guy. He's averaging nearly 2 points per minute on the season, which is absolutely insane. Russell Westbrook, he's back, and he's been a lot better recently. He was really, really rough for a while, but he's been really turning it up recently if you look at his game log. 40 is not the greatest, but then 48, 51, 71, 56, 55, pretty good because he was on a rough stretch of 35, 48, 43, 38, and if you expand that even more, he was in the 30s. I think he even had a 20-point game mixed in there, so it looks like he's back on track. And again, it's a really good matchup versus, sorry, there's something hair on my screen. But yeah, it's a really good matchup versus San Antonio, so wouldn't mind going with Russell Westbrook at 9,600, but there's someone I like even better that's 300 cheaper, and that's going to be Andre Drummond here at 9,300. As long as the avocado issue is gone, he's my favorite spend up on the slate, and he also doesn't break the bank either because he's more than 3K cheaper than James Harden, and he doesn't have the 80-point upside that James Harden does, but we've seen him hit 70 before, and Blake Griffin is also questionable with knee soreness. He did leave last game, which was unfortunate because I played Blake Griffin and I missed cashing by 6 points, and I had Blake Griffin get 7 points. It sucked big time. He was lower owned too. Things happen, but if Blake Griffin is out, we were playing Andre Drummond pretty much every single night when Blake Griffin was out earlier in the season. I remember even paying like 10-5 for the guy. So at 9,300 versus Washington, I don't see why we wouldn't play him. Even if Blake Griffin is active for the game, I say active like NFL, if he's available to play for this game, I still have interest in Drummond because, the knee issue could flare up, and Blake Griffin has not been that effective this season. And I'll really just play anybody versus Washington. It's the matchup I'm in love with here. They have a 229.5 point team total, which is second, not team total, just the whole game. The over-under is 229.5, which is second highest on the entire slate. This is also a pace-up spot for Detroit, as Washington is 5th in pace-up play, while Detroit is 24th. And they're also, like we went over in the defense versus position chart when I was showing you guys, they are the worst defensive team in the NBA, and they suck versus big men. They rank 28th versus centers, and Drummond's been great this year. He's averaging 1.4 points per minute, 24% usage rate. And like I said, even if Blake is in, he should eat. If he's out, he'll eat for sure. And if they're both out because they're both questionable, then we'll have a whole nother discussion, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So I'll go over if both are out. And like I said, if Blake's in, I have interest in Drummond still as long as Drummond's in. If Drummond's out and Blake's in, I know it's a little bit of a mess, but we'll talk through it. So, but if Drummond is in, he is my favorite spend up on the entire slate. Now, my second favorite spend up is Jimmy Butler, 9,100. So that's what I'm talking about. I don't think I have to spend all the way up for Harden, Giannis, or I guess Westbrook's not all the way up, but I don't think you have to spend all the way up for these guys because I'm really liking these two 9K guys, and I feel pretty comfortable with them, and they have 60-point upside and even 70-point upside, to be honest. But Jimmy Butler, let's talk about him. He's at 9,100. I've been playing this guy a lot recently. It's just because the Miami Heat are dealing with some injuries right now. Justice Winslow is out, and Goran Dragic is out again. That's going to leave Butler as the main ball handler again, and I love the matchup versus Memphis as well. It's a pace-up spot as Memphis is 6th in pace of play, while Miami is 13th, and Miami doesn't play that slow, so I think this game's going to be played pretty fast, and I expect this to have a pretty high total, which I was writing some notes last night, so I believe the total, it's one of the higher ones, I believe. I don't remember off the top of my head, but should be a pretty good game environment for Jimmy Butler. Memphis is also 5th worst defensively, and they are awful versus guards, and Jimmy Butler's going to be playing shooting guard here, and they are 30th versus shooting guards. They are dead last, so it does not get better of a matchup here for Jimmy Butler. He's going to be continue to play huge minutes, and I mean, if you just look at his minutes past few games, 43, 37, 42, 44, 36, 37, 41, 35. Minutes are never an issue here, and he's an elite player, 1.24 points per minute, over a 25% usage rate. I love Jimmy Butler on this slate, and if I can start out my lineups tonight with Jimmy Butler and Andre Drummond, I think it's a fantastic way to go, and it also doesn't break the bank either. So definitely like Jimmy Buckets and Andre Drummond. If you look at his recent game log, he's been great. 44, 38 is not too good, but that's also versus LA. Then 61, 43, 68, 55, 62. The guy has been great since December 3rd, so definitely like Jimmy Butler tonight. I would call him a core play for me as of right now, I think. Devin Booker's questionable. Let's see if some news came out. He considered day-to-day. We'll look to see if he plays. If he doesn't, Mikal Bridges will draw the start, so I actually don't know his price. Let me just check. He's 4,100, so I guess he'd be okay. 32 minutes, 27 fantasy points. So, yeah, I guess Devin Booker is out. I'd say he's a pretty solid play. So, again, we'll talk about some value plays going into it, but, again, keep your eye out on Devin Booker news. Siakam versus Cleveland, he exploded last game. He had some lackluster games when I was playing him. Then when I didn't play, I liked him versus Brooklyn. I told you guys I liked him. Unfortunately, I don't listen to my own advice sometimes, and I didn't play him. I ended up scoring 64 fantasy points versus Brooklyn. 10 boards, 5 assists, 3 blocks, 3 steals, 30 points. He was great. Now he's going up against Cleveland, who is one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA. They're bad versus guards, small forwards, power forwards, centers, you name it. They're pretty bad at it. So Siakam, I would have interest in. Do I expect 60-plus points again? No, probably not. That's more of a ceiling game. But Siakam, I think he's good for 50 points on a nightly basis. Pushing a little bit. Good for 40 to 50 points. But, it's a matchup versus Cleveland, so don't mind Siakam here, especially if Fred VanVleet's out. If Fred VanVleet is in, I would say it hurts his production because there's just less usage to go around and, just fantasy points in general. So we'll have to see. But I would have some interest in Siakam if VanVleet is out. Bam Adebayo, if you want to just get some more Miami pieces versus Memphis, he's been pretty good recently. 58, 37 versus Lakers, that's a tough matchup. But then 66, 52. Then before that, he was having a rough stretch. Then he had 52 versus Washington, but then 19, 29, 42, 19, 45. But I think this is one of those matchups where he can have a pretty good game versus Memphis, who just plays at a fast pace, does not play a lot of good defense. You can also look at Hassan Whiteside versus Phoenix. And Whiteside's been awesome. I mean, if you just look at his game log, 59, 49, 42, 41, 59, 35, and 50, 43. Guy's been great, and he's actually been seeing some. You saw 35 minutes versus Denver, which is encouraging to see because Hassan Whiteside's not someone that typically sees big minutes like that. I believe he's only averaging 29 to 30 minutes per game. And we saw 32 versus OKC, 32 versus LA, 34 versus Sacramento. So I like the minutes he's been getting, and they have really no choice to keep him on the floor because he has been great. He's averaging 1.35 points per minute with a 21% usage rate. And Phoenix also sucks versus big men. They're not a bad defensive team. They're more middle of the road, but they really struggle with big guys. 23rd versus centers, and this is also a decently fast-paced game. Phoenix is 7th in pace, while Portland is 12th, and it's only a 1-point spread, so I think Hassan Whiteside's a pretty fantastic play tonight. I'm not sure how much ownership he'll get, but I think he's definitely a really good GPP play, so do have interest in Hassan Whiteside. And scrolling down the list a little bit, Kyle Lowry versus Cleveland, they suck versus point guard, so I would have some interest in Lowry, although he has not really taken too much advantage Fred VanVleet being out, and he continues his poor shooting from deep. 1 for 8 versus Chicago, 0 for 7 versus LA, and then 2 for 8 versus Brooklyn. If those three start falling, he should easily hit over 40 fantasy points, and this is a good matchup versus Cleveland. They rank 29th versus point guard, so I would have some interest in Lowry if Fred VanVleet happens to be out. And then scrolling down a little bit, let's see. Steven Adams, I believe he's been really good recently, if I remember correctly. Well, I guess good for him. 40 points versus Denver, that was pretty good. 35 versus Sacramento, 41 versus Utah, 51 versus Minnesota. So I actually think it's a pretty solid spot for Steven Adams. And, Chicago, I love big men versus Chicago. We just saw Harrell absolutely destroy these guys. They're 30th versus centers, one of the worst rebounding teams in the NBA. And Adams is pretty good on a point per minute basis, averaging 1.1 points per minute. So if he's going to get near 30 minutes in this matchup, wouldn't surprise me if he hit 40 to 50 points for Chicago. They are absolute trash versus center. So honestly, this could be a sneaky 20 rebound, 15 point spot for Steven Adams, maybe even more. So don't mind him in GPPs. I'm not really sure I'd get to him in cash games, but I do think he's a solid player in a solid spot. So would have interest in him. Scroll down some more. Derrick Rose. So if Drummond or Blake Griffin are out, it would be a boost to Derrick Rose. If both are out, I think it would become a pretty solid play versus Washington. Again, it's going to be a fast-paced game, one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA, and we saw him do really well last game with Blake Griffin being out and Andre Drummond. He has statistic. He gets a bump in usage, bump in points per minute. He had 20 points, 12 assists, 4 rebounds in 27 minutes. He even shot over 4 from deep and still had 43 fantasy points. I would have some interest in Derrick Rose. He'd put up a lot of shots. If both guys are in, he'll take a hit, so I probably won't be too interested at 6,100. But again, if both guys are out or even one of them's out, I think he'd be a solid GPP play. Let's see. Tim Hardaway. So Luka Doncic's going to be out, obviously. That's going to open up some more usage and minutes for pretty much everybody on the Mavericks because he is the main guy on that team. It's not like some secondary options got rolled out. It's the main guy. He's pretty much the whole team. Besides Kristaps, but so the main thing here is no Luka, and it's going to open up a lot of minutes and usage. And last game when Luka left, Hardaway played a season-high 42 minutes, which helped with overtime, but still, he still saw 42 minutes, and he had a 26% usage rate in that game and 40 fantasy points, 28 real-life points, 6 for 14 from deep. I like the volume there. And this is a fast-paced matchup versus Milwaukee, as they are second in pace of play, while Dallas is 18th. And I expect him to push for 35 minutes tonight. Do I think he's going to be about a point per minute? Probably not, but I think he could be close to it. And if he pushes for 35 minutes, I think he can get you 30 fantasy points, which is not too bad at 5,800. And if he's hot from deep, got the upside of more. We saw a game where he was 9 for 12 from deep versus Sacramento. So I like the upside with Tim Hardaway, and I do think he's a pretty solid play on this slate. You could also look at his teammate Jalen Brunson, who I'd say he's pretty much near a core play for me tonight at 5,500. He played 34 minutes versus Miami. Again, overtime helped, but if you look at his minutes before that, 15, 4, 18, 18. So he's going to be a main benefactor of Luka Doncic. He's going to be moved into the starting lineup. He had a pretty good game. He flirted with a triple-double. He had 18 points, 8 assists, 7 rebounds, 38 fantasy points. Had a very solid game. He also had a 26% usage rate in that game as well. And like I said, it's going to be a fast-paced game. And Milwaukee is 17th versus point guard, so it's a good matchup. Only 5,500. I really like Jalen Brunson tonight. I would probably like to get him in all my lineups. I say all my lineups. I make one lineup a night, so I guess that'd be all my lineups. Luke Kennard. This is going to be a fast-paced game, and if one of these guys is missing from Detroit, it's going to open up some more minutes and just usage overall for Luke Kennard. And he had a really good game versus a fast-paced team in Houston where he played 34 minutes, 4 for 7 from deep. I feel like he hit all 4 of those threes in the first quarter. He had 7 boards, 3 assists, 22 points, 38 fantasy points. If one of these guys is out for Detroit, he would become a pretty solid play because I like Luke Kennard in fast-paced games where he can just blaze threes. This would be one of them versus Washington. It really does not get much better than this. So Kennard would be on my radar for sure, just depending on who misses this game. And then, let's see. You could play Norman Powell if Fred VanVleet's out. He's just going to play big minutes. And he has actually been pretty solid the past 3 games. He's getting about over 30 minutes per game. And, I like the volume. 15 shots, 11, 16. He's been shooting some threes. 30 fantasy points, 27 points, 37 points. If VanVleet is out, I don't mind Norman Powell. Cleveland is a dumpster fire versus shooting guards and small forwards, so wouldn't mind looking at Powell as more of a cash game option. I think he's pretty safe. I'd say he's a safe bet for 25 to 30 fantasy points with upside of more. Going down the list some more here. Christian Wood, I want to talk about him. First of all, you could play OG. He's going to see big minutes versus Cleveland, and they're pretty bad for defensively. Only saw 21 minutes versus Brooklyn, but he's been getting over 30 minutes, so I don't mind OG here. I think he's a pretty safe bet for 25 plus fantasy points at 4,900, so I say he's a solid cash game option. But Christian Wood, so if some of these guys missed the game for Detroit, I think he's a fantastic play. I was on him once the guys got ruled out for, once Andre Drummond got ruled out for Detroit in the last game versus Houston. And I really have a lot of interest in if one of these guys gets ruled out, or even both. And if both get ruled out, he would be a lock for me on this slate. He was tremendous in the last game, where he had 11 points, 12 rebounds, and only 22 minutes, 30 fantasy points. The guy was pretty good. And on the season, he's averaging 1.18 points per minute. And this is an elite matchup down low versus Washington. They are 20th versus power forwards and 28th versus centers. This game's not going to feature much defense. It's going to be fast-paced. I think he can rack up some blocks, get some rebounds, get some points. I like Christian Wood quite a bit at this price tag. If one of these guys are out, and if both are out, he'd become pretty much a lock at 4,500. You could also look at Bruce Brown, who I believe is, same price, 4,500. He had a really good game. Again, if only if there's some injuries on this team. If both guys are in, won't have too much interest in Bruce Brown, just because the minutes will take a hit in the usage. But last game, saw 31 minutes, 48 fantasy points, 16 points, 10 rebounds, 6 assists, 4 steals. So would have some interest in Bruce Brown, again, if there's injuries on this team. You could look at Tyler Hero, who's 4,600. I like the fast-paced matchup versus Memphis. This could be a game where he's just hitting his threes. Bounced back after 2 lackluster games. He had a huge game versus Chicago, then 2 rough games versus Atlanta and LA. Then versus Dallas, he played 39 minutes, 3 for 6 from deep, 19 points, 31 fantasy points. So Tyler Hero, it's a good matchup versus Memphis, worst team in the league versus shooting guards, and they're really pretty bad versus point guards as well. So Tyler Hero would be a pretty solid option at 4,600. You could also look at Derek Jones Jr. at 4,200. Again, just getting guys versus Memphis. I like the fast-paced spot, and this is actually a pretty good spot for Derek Jones. Individually, because he's a good defensive player, and Memphis likes to turn the ball over quite a bit, so I could see him getting some steals here, getting some blocks, and he's a good defensive player. Like I said, he's going to be pretty busy on the defensive end, and he's played over 25 minutes the past 5 games, so I do like the consistency that there's been for the minutes. He also saw 35 versus Atlanta, although that game was overtime, but if he's needed to play big minutes, he can do it. 24 points, 33 points, 23 points, only 4,200. I like the spot versus Memphis. I think he's a pretty solid play on this slate. So don't mind him as a salary saver. And if you go even lower, I wouldn't hate the idea of using Dwight Powell here at 4K, just because Luka's out. There's going to be more minutes to go around. And he's not been great this season, but there's just more minutes to go around, and I expect him to get over 25 minutes tonight. And he might push for 30, and Milwaukee is 21st versus center, so I don't mind the spot here at all. He's only been about 0.72 points per minute this year, but last year he was around 1. So without Luka, I'd have to imagine he should have a pretty solid game here, get you over 20, 25 fantasy points, and at 4K, I would take that. So I don't mind Dwight Powell. Not my most favorite cheap play, but he is grading out as a pretty solid point per dollar option. And again, if Devin Booker's out, you could look at Mikal Bridges. Portland's one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA, and he scored 27 points in the last game, saw 32 minutes. So would have some interest in Mikal Bridges if Devin Booker happens to be out. And really, that's about it. You could look at Nerlens Noel here at 3,900. The problem is he's only going to see about 15 to 20 minutes in this game, although he's pretty good on a points per minute basis. But going against Chicago, one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA. Now, he's had some good games in 20 minutes, though, versus Portland, which was a good matchup. He had 35 fantasy points. And then versus Golden State, he had 24 fantasy points. I mean, he's going to get you about 15 to 20 minutes, which is unfortunate because he's a pretty good player. But if he's going to give me 20 minutes versus Chicago, he might be able to get you 25 fantasy points. So I don't hate the idea of using Noel here. Maybe you get you a cheap double-double. Not my most favorite play in the world. He's not a very safe play either because the minutes aren't secure, but I would have some interest in him at only 3,900 versus Chicago team who sucks defensively versus big men. But that's really about it for this slate. So my favorite plays as of right now, I would say, is pretty much Jimmy Butler and Andre Drummond. And then we'll have to see some injury news. Maybe if it opens up some more plays, Mikal Bridges could be a pretty good play potentially. Then some decent mid-range plays as well. Anyway, guys, I'm going to leave you with that. Hope this video was helpful. If it was, remember to leave a like. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really appreciate it. Also, follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16, and I'll see you guys in the next video.